part 2 of learning to play Blucher. And we are going to go ahead and get this scenario started full blast. And the Russians will have the first turn. Now, in the first video, we went over the basics of unit activation and momentum, and also my solo activation and momentum method, which we'll be using today. The momentum total for each side will be 1d6 because it is a single core on each side. And I think that will be suitable enough to give you an example of how momentum works in this game. Now, we did cover in the first video the two most common forms of activation. The first being a core activation, and the second being your individual unit activation. There is a third method of activation, which is activation by command, and the Russians do not have a CNC commander in this game, not a specific personality. They didn't pay for one, so they won't be using one, but maybe in the future we'll see the French use one. Remember, they do have lawns available at their disposal. But in the meantime, we are going to go ahead and activate by a single core activation. And we are going to activate these three front brigades right here, straight forward towards the French. And this will allow us to get them out there, advancing towards the French, obviously, what we want to do. And we also want to give these three brigades right here room to maneuver to form basically a wide line. Now, one thing that they could do here is they could use a reserve movement because they're all concealed, and we could move them up to 12 base widths, which would be 12 unit distances. 12 times 3 inches is 36 inches, so they can move 36 inches as long as they're not moving through any rough terrain like woods or rough ground or anything like that. Unless it's by road, then they can. And they can't start or end their movement within closer than 4 base widths of the enemy. So they could, in theory and realistically, they could advance all the way across this field and end 4 movement distances away from the French, which would be 12 inches. And that might be a good idea to clear that big field gap there, since they don't have any artillery and they do need to close with the French as quickly as possible. But we're not going to do that. The Russians are under command of a nobody here who doesn't know anything about war, and they are going to march slowly across this field with the French guns aimed at them. So, like I said, we are going to activate these three front brigades forward to give these rear 3 room to maneuver and form one big line of battle to engage the French. So we are going to go ahead and instantly activate these 3 as our first core activation. So we're going to remove the concealed markers, so they are no longer in reserve or concealed. They are revealed to the French player, and they can no longer make a reserve move, and they can be targeted by fire at full effect. So we will go ahead and move them 2 movement distances, which would be a total of 6 inches. And my bases are a little bit wider than 3 inches, but that's okay. I still use the regular movement standard, which most people use, as 3 inches. So now those 3 brigades have moved out and started advancing towards the French up there at the base of the hill. And as you can see, I kind of redeployed the French with a gap in the middle. I'll get to that here in a minute as to why I did that. And now we are going to go ahead and we are going to attempt to activate these 3 brigades right here. However, we first need to test momentum. So we used 1, 2, 3 momentum, and we rolled a 1d6 momentum die. And we rolled a 5. So the 5 gives us enough momentum to continue on with our turn. If it would have been a 1, 2, or a 3, he wouldn't have had any more momentum to move these brigades. So now we are going to do another core activation with these 3 units. We're going to leave the cuirassiers, which are mainly off camera down here. We're going to leave them in reserve and not moving. We're going to save them just in case they need them. At least the Russian commander has a little bit of sense there. And we are going to activate this core, and we are going to attempt to start to spread out and form a line around a wider line so we can engage the Russians with a harder hitting power all at the same time. So let me bring this slightly closer so we can see it better. See what I'm talking about here. Now, in order to do this, we need to turn a couple of these units to where their facing is different. They're moving towards the outside of the main line. Now, the pivot point is the center front of each unit. So this is the pivot point to the middle brigade. This is the pivot point for this brigade right here. Now, a unit can pivot as a free action up to 45 degrees either way on that front point. The footprint can overlap another friendly unit. That's okay, as long as that friendly unit is not in contact with an enemy. It's okay. If it is in contact with an enemy, then he cannot pivot. He would not be able to pivot and make that overlap to move. He would have to either move straight forward or figure something else out to maneuver however he'd wish to maneuver. You can pivot. I could pivot this unit here and leave him there even though it's overlapping there. But by the end of this activation, this unit will have had to move or something to where there are no overlaps occurring. Okay? So, first we are going to pivot this far unit right here. We're going to pivot it 45 degrees on its center point, which is right there. And then we're going to move him 6 inches. So as you can see, that unit has now begun to go around the side of its friendly line. And we're going to do the same with this unit, with this brigade right here. We are going to pivot 45 degrees on its front center point, and then we're going to move 6 inches. And now that brigade has moved there. And now we're going to take this brigade down in the middle, and we're just going to keep him in reserve. We're going to move him up 6 inches, which of course is touching right there. So we have just activated 6 corps, or 6 brigades of the single corps in 2 separate activations. You can activate a corps separately, so you can do a half in the beginning like I did, and then the second half after as another activation. That's okay, as long as when you activate, you are activating at minimum 2 units to do a corps activation, and they all have to be chained within 1 base width of each other. All the units don't have to be within 1 base of everybody else, but as a chain, there can be no more than 1 base width between at least one of the other units forming a chain. I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about. I don't need to go into further detail. So the Russians have used up 6 momentum, and they still have their cuirassiers down here in reserve. But even if I wanted to activate this unit, I would not be able to, because I've already used 6 momentum, and the greatest number on our momentum die is a 6, which would be equal to or greater than the 6 momentum that I have currently used. So let's just say, I say I want to move again, I've used 6 momentum, I roll the die, it's a 5, that's less than or equal than the amount of momentum that I've already used, so my turn is over. That's how my solo activation works. Now, let's say if I was using 2 dice for momentum because I had 2 corps or 3 corps, whatever else out, and I've used 6 momentum, I'd roll these, and right here I was very unlucky. It was a very unlucky roll. That's a 4 and a 1, so 5 total momentum. My turn would still be over. I would leave a whole corps completely inactive, not moving, because I just used up 6 momentum on this one, trying to do this special, little formation move and everything else. I used up 6 momentum, and then I rolled a 5 on my momentum die. So that's how my solo activation method works. And now we can go ahead and go on to the next phase, which would be the shooting phase. And obviously the Russians, like I said before, they do not have any artillery on the field today. So they are not within volley range or skirmish range, so there is no shooting for the Russians. And then we go on to the combat phase, and obviously there was no charges, there is nobody in base-to-base contact, so there is no combat here either. And now we can go ahead and skip the rest of the turn because we know there's no retreats and no involuntary moves or withdrawals or anything like that. Excuse me. So we are going to end the first turn of this scenario, and now it's going to be turn number 2, which is the French turn, and we'll be right back. So now it is turn number 2, the French. And now the French are obviously going to stay right where they're at. They are fighting off a delaying action pretty much until their reserves can arrive, their surprise reserves, and they don't want to move. Simple as that. So what they are going to do, they are going to activate a single unit, which is this brigade closest to us, this infantry brigade. They're going to activate that. So it is going to reveal that unit. They are no longer concealed, but they are going to become prepared. So we're just going to put that green marker there to symbolize that they are a prepared unit, and that is them, tightening up their flanks, for preparing to form square, or even forming square, stuff like that. It's becoming prepared, and what that creates is a vulnerable formation to enemy artillery. Fortunately, there is no Russian artillery, so there is no guns that would be able to take advantage of that unit preparing and becoming a big, bulky, blocky mass of soldiers all gathered together and able to just bomb the heck out of them. So there is no benefit here that the Russians can take advantage of. However, also becoming prepared, the one advantage that it will have is an enemy cavalry attacking that unit would have to re-roll any successful hits. So if that Russian cuirassier unit gets jumpy and comes in and charges that unit, which is the flank, the closest unit to that cavalry, they would have to re-roll any hits, and they would become potential misses because it is kind of hard to hit. So I know I'm kind of metagaming that because technically that cavalry is still concealed and the French wouldn't truly know what that unit exactly is. And if I was really playing a solo game by myself, I wouldn't metagame myself into that corner. I would act like the French have no clue that that is a cavalry unit, and they would remain unprepared until they had a greater understanding of the combat situation on the field as it is. So, but I just wanted to do that to give you an example of, the different things that units can do in their movement activations. Now, they can only prepare or move. They cannot do both. So if that unit would have moved, he would not have been able to become prepared as well in the same turn. That is all the movement that the French are going to do. They're going to keep their chasseurs right here, concealed and in reserve as well. And they are going to kind of hold them off and as a last resort or maybe a stalling tactic. We'll see how the situation develops. So that's the end of the movement, and now we're going to go into the shooting phase. Okay, so now we are in the French shooting phase. I do allow pre-measurement in my games, and it's a good thing I do because they are short. Their maximum long range is 8 base widths, which would be 24 inches, and they are about 26 or 27 inches out, the nearest unit. So the French artillery is not in range as of yet. Now, I want to comment as well on the unit they prepared. Becoming prepared in a movement phase does not classify as moving. So that unit, if there was Russians within range, would still be able to fire at any Russian infantry brigades or cavalry or whatever was within range. They would still be able to fire as long as it met all the normal criteria, which we will explain here in a moment. Now, then speaking of the normal criteria, so the eligibility to fire mainly is did you move or not, as well as your firing arc, which is your 45-degree angle from either corner. From your center point can go up to 45 degrees. So it's not necessarily allowed if you're shooting at an enemy unit where that line would cross through a friendly unit, it's not allowed, even if the elevation is greater, like here. And that is why I made this hole here, so the French artillery would have a field of fire through there, that you cannot fire over the heads of friendly soldiers. And that's basically it when it comes to that. If your base is even partially in a waterway, like a river, stream, whatever, you may not fire, and that's that. Or in an urban area, such as a town or city or whatever it may be, units that are garrisoning or occupying a built-up area cannot fire out, and you cannot fire in to those areas either, except I believe with heavy artillery. We'll get to that later. And the only way to clear out a unit of an urban area is by, good old dirty old-fashioned way, the hand-to-hand, by the bayonet, assault the built-up area with close combat. So back to firing. So within one base width, this is speaking of the infantry, so within one base width range is full volley firing. You'll use your full strength at shooting. Within two base widths, you are skirmishing, and that is a little bit weaker, and we'll talk about those differences when that time comes. With artillery fire, short range is within two base widths, and that's basically using canister shot. You get a bonus for that, and it can be very devastating to a brigade to get caught by canister. And then you have up to 8 base widths, which is long range fire, which is what we're waiting on, but the Russians are just slightly out of the way. So that will be the end of the French shooting phase. So it will go to the combat phase, which there is no combat. So the last phase, and I called it something different at the end of the Russian term, but the last phase is the status phase. And this is where you check for reinforcements, check army morale, roll the MO dice, and before the first turn, since there is no status phase, this is, as the game starts, then we're talking about rolling MO for the opposing player, whoever's not going first. But anyway, so we will go ahead and see about our French reinforcements. Okay, so in the beginning of a game, each section or group of reinforcements is basically given an entry area. And the French reinforcements, of course, will be arriving via this road right here off the edge of the map. So that is the first thing that we need to determine. Then there is a reinforcement factor, and this is usually 4. It can be lower if you're in more friendly controlled territory and they're more likely to show up, or it can be higher if they're attempting something more difficult, such as arriving on the enemy's flank or something like that. So, before the start of the game, each group of reinforcements should have all this information already allotted and assigned to them. That way everybody knows exactly what's going on. When you check for reinforcements, a player checks for a specific group of reinforcements. He rolls 1 die and multiplies its result by the factor, which is 4. So if the result is equal to or lower than the current turn number, that group of reinforcements has arrived. So this being turn number 1, we're going to roll 1 die and multiply it by that factor. So we're going to roll, and it's a 5. So it would be 5 times the factor of 4, which would be 20, which we're only on turn 2, so obviously that is nowhere near arriving. Now, so the soonest that these reinforcements could actually arrive would be turn number 4, which would be the next French turn. If they roll a 1, that would be 1 times the reinforcement factor, which is 4. That would be 4, which would be equal to their current turn. And then the reinforcements would arrive. So the next French turn, if they roll a 1 on their reinforcement check, those reinforcements will arrive. If not, then they'll have to wait yet another turn. and we'll get into placing reinforcements when that actually happens. In the meantime, it is time for turn number 3 of the Russians. All right, turn number 3, like I said, belongs to the Russians. So, the Russians are going to pretty much do the same thing here. They are going to do a single corps activation for these 4 units right here. And that is, actually that's pretty risky here. You know, they're going to activate all these as a single corps, which would be 6 units. But then that really wouldn't display the momentum, would it? And plus, this commander, like I already said, he's a really sloppy guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. So yeah, we're going to do it this way. We're going to activate these 4 as the first activation, and hopefully he has enough momentum to bring up those other 2 regiments. So he is going to activate 1, 2, 3, 4 units. Actually, I'm going to just activate these 3. Give them a little bit better chance to continue on with momentum. So we'll activate these first 3 brigades right here. But we're not going to move them their full 6 inches, their 2 base widths. We're only going to move them 1. And that way, hopefully, the other brigades will get a chance to maybe catch up and form line. So there we go. We've used up 3 momentum. And now the Russians need to roll their momentum dice. So we're going to roll. And we rolled a 2, which is less than the amount of momentum he used. Remember, he used 3, and he only rolled a 2 on momentum, so his turn is over. He does not get another activation during this turn for movement. So now we go to the shooting phase, which there still is no shooting. And we go to the combat phase. There is no combat. And now we go to the status phase, which they have no reinforcements coming, so they don't need to worry about that. And the Russians are becoming a little bit disorganized here. And, you know, like I said, they could have activated this whole group as one single corps activation, and then that still would have let these units move around and still try and form that battle line, which is what they're intending on doing. However, I did it in a sloppy manner, and that way you can see the way momentum works and the way you can cut yourself short by making mistakes or by thinking you have a great plan going on, and, you know, all of a sudden, you know, you think because you only used 4 momentum and you're rolling 3d6, you know, you never know when you're going to roll 3 1s and a 2, or, you know, 4 1s or whatever it may be. You never know when you're going to get that horrible dice roll and your turn's going to end. So even playing this with a solo mechanism, it still creates a lot of fog of war and a lot of unknown, to where, well, you're just not really sure what that particular army is going to be capable of doing, how well it's going to maneuver, how well it's going to be able to get in position. So that's about it. And that's also where your better CNCs will come in handy, like Napoleon and other things, because you are going to get a lot better opportunities to maneuver your army and get them in advantageous positions. So that's it for the Russian turn. It's now going to be turn number 4, which is the French up to bat. Okay, and now we are going to go ahead. I think that 3 inches should have brought them within 24 inches. Let's check. And no, it was at 25 inches. However, yeah, instead of keeping you guys waiting, we're just going to, you know what, I'm going to move the Russians up an inch just so we can get this sucker going. So there we go, because I don't want to go through another boring turn of movement and keep you guys waiting any longer for shooting. So now they're within 24 inches of shooting distance. Yes, exactly 24 inches. So this is how shooting works. Now, like I said before, they can't shoot over the targets, over the heads of their friendly units in line of their target. So the only infantry brigade that they can specifically target, adhering to that rule, is this one on the Russian left or the French right. So that, what brigade is that? That is the Petersburg Brigade. So they're going to shoot at the Petersburg Brigade, And they are going to get 6 die, or excuse me, 5 die, because that's their number right here. You can see the number 5. That's where they start. They start with full ammunition. So the next time they shoot, that will be down to a 4. Now, a lot of people, like I said, they would have this card underneath their artillery unit with just this bottom part sticking out, and they would mark it off with an erasable marker or whatever. They put these in sleeves so they can make marks on units. They can write down what corps it belongs to, whatever else. I don't do that. I usually play with a roster, and it's a little, it's a wet erase spiral bound thing, and this is a wet dry erase, excuse me, where I can just wipe stuff off or whatever. And that's how I normally keep track of elan and ammo for artillery or whatever, and that keeps the board really clear of clutter and stuff like that, so I don't usually have to worry about that. However, for instance here, we are going to be dilly-dallying around with these cards. And just for example, but I'm still not going to put them underneath. I'm just going to, if a unit takes a hit, I'm going to mark 1 hit with a green die behind that specific brigade. And that way we know that they've taken 1 hit. And then we'll know where their elan is at from there on. So actually, instead of that, we'll just mark them with whatever number they are currently on. I think that would work better, except for the artillery. We got to keep in mind there is 2 4s and there is 2 2s on their marker. We'll deal with that when the time comes. Anyway, so the foot artillery has an ammo strength of 5, as displayed right next to my thumb. If it would focus, not going to focus again. So we are going to roll die. Now you have to have at least a half a base width of this gap here. If it was any less, it would be obstructed, which would half the dice, rounding up. So we would actually have 3 die to shoot. But since there is more than enough room here, it's unobstructed firing, so we get to roll all 5. Now only 6s are going to hit, so we get to roll 5d6, and on 6s they hit. And we rolled a 5, a 3, a 2, a 5, and a 4. So that is nothing. They did not hit. We are going to mark them from a 5 to a 4. We'll put that dice right there. And now they're marked. We know that they're at a 4 on their elan. Now one thing, like I said, you have to keep in mind on these cards is there's 2 4s. This is easy to remember since this is the only artillery unit on the board. We know that that's its first 4. So it'll fire with 4 die the next round, and then the next round it'll fire with 4 die, and then we'll mark it to a 3, and so on. So we know that the Russians have 6 elan on each of their infantry brigades. So that's what we are striving to knock them down. We're trying to weaken them out as much as possible. But that's going to end the French firing phase. There's obviously no more artillery and nobody within range. So now it's the combat phase, and that's over. And now it's the status phase, which includes the reinforcement arrival roll. So like I said, the reinforcement factor is 4, and we need to roll the die and multiply whatever the die roll is by that reinforcement factor. And if it's equal to or lower than the turn, the reinforcements arrive. And we rolled a 6, which would be 24, which is far greater. It's even worse than the last roll. That would be, if we were on turn 24, those reinforcements would have arrived. But we're not there yet. So that's the end of the turn, and now it is going to be turn number 5. Okay, turn number 5. It's the Russians. So this is even bigger blunder than what he thought it was, and I'm going to explain why, and I kind of touched base on this earlier. You can activate your corps as 2 parts. You can do just like I did. You can move this first half and then try and maneuver the second half into a reformation or whatever you're trying to do. That's completely feasible if you're rolling the correct momentum. However, if you get hung out to dry, like these units did here, now I can't activate this whole corps as a corps activation because they are further than 1 base width. They can't form a chain. 3 inches, they can't hit These three are completely out of range of these three. So that activation is no good. Although I did move these guys up an inch. Remember, just so they would be in range of the artillery. So I'll move all them up an inch. Now we'll see where they're at. And they're still without a range. They're still not in range of activation. So they can't activate as one single corps. Now this goes back to what I was telling you about the third way to activate. If you're in a desperate situation and you have a CNC available that you haven't put on the table, I'm going to take Lons here, just an example. So the French commander is going to join us in showing you how a command activation works. This is the third way to activate. You can place this guy anywhere as long as he's not within 2 base widths of an enemy. And you can even place him on top of a friendly unit. That works perfectly fine. It doesn't matter. So you can place him anywhere, and anybody within 2 base widths of him, which would be 6 inches, could activate. So that would be him, these 3, and him. And it would not allow him to get these 2. But if you placed him here, you could still activate all these guys because he's within 6 of him. He's now within 6 of him. So you could get 5 guys, but still at minimum 1 guy would be left out hanging and wouldn't be able to activate. The thing about activating in this manner is once you do a command activation like this, your turn's over. So that's it. So you could, in theory, you could do a single unit activation and activate this unit and try and move them up in the line here. Okay? And then you could, after that, you could do a command activation and activate all 5 of these guys and then move them. Okay, so you could activate it that way. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can try and manipulate your activations to try and get the most out of your turn. It's always a struggle to outsmart the momentum that's against you. So that's the way the command activation works. However, the Russians do not have a suitable CNC that can do that. So we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. These guys aren't even within... Okay, so these 2 could do a core activation right here. This one would have to be a single activation, and these 3 would be a core activation. So you know what? We're going to do something crazy. We are going to activate these 3 units right here as a core activation. Or do we would just want to activate the 2? Yeah, let's just activate these 2 units as a core activation. So the cavalry is, you know what? No, we're not going to. We're going to do a reserve move with him in just a moment. However, so let's go ahead and activate. These 2 can activate because they're within 3 inches. So we're going to activate these 2. And this one is going to pivot on his front point right there. And now he's going to move 6 inches. Which will put him right there. This one is going to move a partial movement right up to the back there. And so we just used 2 momentum. And now we want to activate him as a single momentum. However, we just used 2 momentum, so we need higher than a 2. And we rolled a 2, so his turn is over. The Russian turn is over. You see, that's what I'm talking about. Even if you try and play it safe by, keeping your momentum to a minimum, and that way you're almost assured to get that roll. I had a 66% chance to get another activation with them, and it completely failed. So the Russians are still left hanging. And now we will not even break the scene here because we know there's no shooting, there's no combat, and there's no status phase here. So we are going to go to the French, and the French are not going to move again. They are going to shoot with their artillery, which is going to have 4 dice this time. And they're going to shoot at the same Russian unit, the St. Petersburg Brigade right here. And we get 4d6 this time, and 6s will hit. That one was completely cocked. And we roll a 1, a 3, a 4, and a 5. So that is no hit. That die was sitting there random. Excuse me. So the artillery has once again been ineffective, and this will go down to its second 4, which is right where my thumb is not covering. And then after the next shot, it will be at a 3. And then it will be almost out of ammo at that point. So you can see the artillery becomes less effective the more you shoot with it. But okay, now I'm back. You probably didn't notice because I would edit that part out. However, I got a call from my son who was off at work and I had to go pick him up. So here we are at the end, or almost at the end, of turn number 6, which belongs to the French. We just fired again with the artillery and it missed once again. So now we go into the combat phase. There is no combat, of course, because there is no enemy bases in contact with us. So we go on to the status phase, and that, once again, you should know this, starting to get a little bit repetitive, but now we check for reinforcements. And this, being turn number 6, we roll the d6 and do the multiply it by the reinforcement factor, which is 4, and if it's equal to or less than the current turn, then the reinforcements arrive. So this is turn 6. If we rolled a 2, that would be 8, which is greater than the current turn. So the 2 or more, the reinforcements don't arrive. So it's still on a 1. The reinforcements arrive. Next French turn will be turn number 8, and therefore we could roll a 1 or a 2 and they'll arrive. But this turn it's still a 1, and we rolled a 2 way out there. We rolled a 2, and that means there is no reinforcements. So the French are still waiting for their buddies to get here and save their hide. And now we will go ahead and move to turn 7, which will be the Russian player. Okay, we're back at turn 7 with the Russians, and they really want to take this unit of heavy cavalry and do a reserve move and basically get them all the way down this road towards the French chasseurs on the opposite end of the road. So the only problem with that is they're not close enough to this unit to do a corps activation. So they would have to do a single unit activation, which in turn would cancel out all further corps activations for the Russians this turn. So they don't want to give up doing a corps activation to get their main attack force even closer to the French at the base of that hill there. So they are trying to kind of balance this tough decision and decide what is more important. And at this time, they will go ahead and do a corps activation for their infantry. However, I did want to touch base on the reserve moves for just a brief moment. And a reserve move, regardless of what type of unit it is, it could be artillery, it could be infantry, or it can be cavalry. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it is concealed, which in most cases, if players are using the cards, this would be here instead of the unit, and that is how you would know that is a concealed unit. And once it is revealed, you flip it over to its normal side and you see, oh, that's the Russian cuirassier. Well, we can go ahead and just replace that card with the stand now that you can see it. So you can use, and many players do use, both the cards and the miniatures. It works perfectly fine. You start off the game with your units concealed, and that way your opponent does not know your deployment plan, your potential strategies, whatever may be coming his way. It can be kept concealed. And I think that is a very unique part of Blucher, is that ability to keep that a secret from your opponents. And anyway, back to the reserve move. Like I said, once they are revealed, you can reserve move them. or actually reserve moving them will reveal them. And they can move 12 base distances, base widths, in any direction. They can bend, they can curve, they can turn 90 degrees. It doesn't matter as long as the total movement doesn't exceed their 12 base widths or 12 movement units, whatever you want to call it. In this case, like I said, each movement unit for my size bases are 3 inches, which are the movement size you use for the cards. Now, these bases are slightly bigger, like I've said, than 3 inches, but that's okay. I find it works perfectly fine. And there's a little bit of blank space there. So I like to think of it as the unit size exactly where, you know, the troops' edge are. But anyway, we can go ahead, since we're not going to be doing a reserve move. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to touch base on. So when you do a reserve movement, like I said, you can move any direction, whatever it is. You just can't move through any rough or difficult terrain, built up areas, anything like that, unless it's along a road. If this road is going through a forest, then you can move through that forest using that road in a reserve move. That's fine. Now, your reserve move has to stop either when you've reached your maximum 12 base width movement allowance, or if you have become visible to an enemy unit within 4 base widths, which is the normal spotting range to reveal an enemy unit. So I could charge him down all the way down this road and it would be just perfectly fine until I came within 4 base widths of the French chasseurs, and then I would have to stop, which would be right about here, would be 4 base widths. 4 base widths would be 12 inches, and then they would have to stop at the 12-inch mark. And of course they would be revealed and their movement would be over. So that is how reserve moves work. However, we're not doing a reserve move with this cavalry. We are going to do a corps activation with this infantry here. So we can measure and just double check and see if they are within 1 base width, if this unit is within 1 base width of the rest of it. No, that's 4 inches, and that's even further. That's about 5 1/4. So this unit is still out of range, out of command, out of the minimum distance allowed for a corps activation. So that's kind of troublesome for that, because the Russians were kind of hoping to gather as a single corps here. But we are going to go ahead and activate this corps right here. And we are going to go ahead and move. And we are going to use up all. We're not going to use up all with these 3 front brigades, because we want this one to be in line at the end of the movement. So we're going to move this brigade first on the right, and that will allow us to get everybody else in line. So that would be 2 movement distances for that brigade. And now we're just going to march up the remaining 3, because we know that that is within their movement range. So they've gotten a little bit bigger of a battle line, and this unit is also going to move up behind there in support. So we've gotten a little bit wider of a battle line with the Russians. Not as wide as they'd like, but we need to go ahead and see if we are going to be allowed to activate. And the commander has decided that his cavalry is just fine where it's at, and we will take a look at the infantry brigade. Teenagers. My son was just trying to sneak by me here. It's Friday night, so he's excited to get out of the house, but I'm excited to get back to this Friday night action, man. I've been waiting all work week to get here to this part, start some combat and some Blucher. But like I was saying, the Russian commander, the nobody commander, has decided that his cav's just fine where it's at for right now, and he's going to attempt to hurry up this infantry brigade, which is lagging far behind at this point, because he wants to at least have some sort of coordinated attack when they run into the French line. So we do know, however, that the Russians have used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 momentum already during this activation. So he's going to have to roll d6, and hopefully he rolls a 6. Otherwise, his turn is going to be over because he already had 5 momentum. Oh, and he rolls a 6. So some stroke of genius or some wise words that he said. Who knows what happens? This Russian brigade will indeed get to activate. So what we want to do is we want to pivot him on his front center point right here, that much, which is well within 45 degrees. And now we are going to hurry him along his maximum distance of 6 inches, which is 2 base widths. And there's 6 inches. So he has managed to catch up. And now if we measure point to point, he is now barely within 3 inches of range of this brigade right here at top. So he is now part of that corps once again. Well, he's always been part of that corps, but he can now fully activate with that corps without risking losing an activation at this point. So that is a very good thing for the Russian player. Unfortunately, we know we're rolling d6 for a momentum, and he's just used 6 momentum, so there's no way he's going to be able to get any more activations at this point. So the phase will go on to the shooting phase, and we are almost approaching skirmishing distance. Skirmishing distance is 2 base widths or 6 inches, and we look like we are almost there. We look, just judging here, quick glance, looks like we're about 13 or 14 inches apart. So the Russians are getting close, folks. And we will go ahead and go to turn number 8, which is the French, because there's nothing left to do with the Russians. Okay, turn number 8. We decided to do it from the other angle here. And what we have is still the same situation that we've had before. The French are unwilling to make any adjustments at this point, although at some point it might be wise for them to take this far brigade on the French right and maybe pivot them to kind of close off this gap here and to close off any wide areas that the Russians may be able to assault them. That far brigade up there, that far Russian brigade, the one that was lagging, if we can force them to go through the woods or whatever, that might be a sticky situation for the Russians, or it could turn into a disadvantage for the French. We will talk about that when it comes time. However, since there is no movement activations on behalf of the French, although let's see here, it might be that during the Russian players' next discovery phase, they might see and reveal these chasseurs. So let's see. And they will, because they are within 12 inches, which is 4 base widths of the chasseurs. So at the start of the Russian turn there, they are going to reveal that unit. However, the French could be proactive and charge into that brigade, but they would do it without infantry support. I think they're going to hold off because they're still scared at that hidden unit up there, and they're not sure what that is. So they are not going to do that. Not yet, at least. So we'll go back up top here to the top of the center point of the French defense, which is up on top of this hill, the artillery. And the artillery is going to take another shot at the St. Petersburg Brigade. And they are down to their last 4 dots on their ammo card. So next turn he'll be shooting with 3 dice instead of 4. So he's going to need 6s to hit. Here we go. And once again he rolled a 4, a 2, and 2 1s. Completely miffing. So we've rolled a lot of dice with that artillery and failed to get even a single 6, which is rather strange. I mean, you don't get a lot of hits with artillery usually, but sometimes you can get lucky and get a really good blast in, knock off 3 elan or whatever, 4 elan if you're really lucky. But it's kind of uncommon for me to go, you know, the first turn we rolled 5 dice, the second turn we rolled 4, the third shot we rolled 4 dice. So, out of 14 dice, we have failed to roll a single six. On 14d6, we didn't roll a single six. That is a little strange. So the French artillery is a little off their game today, as we can tell. And their ammo will now go to a 3. So I just turned that die to a 3. As we can see here, a little bit too much glare. There we go. You can see that better. But that is where the French ammo is at this point in time. And we can see, once again, how the ammo progresses. We have just used we used 5 on the first shot, 4, and then 4. So now their ammunition is at 3. They'll only get 1 shot with 3 dice before they're only shooting with 2 dice. So, and this reflects many things. It's hard to man a gun. It is. It's hot, heavy, and dangerous work. It really is. And you have these guns heating up. Their recoil becomes greater and greater. Their recoil and jumping becomes erratic. You are getting soldiers injured while these guns are firing. You have misfires while loading. You have all sorts of non-exhaustive incidences going on when you're around these artillery pieces. And, all these factors combined is what you see with those cards. So it's not like, oh, well, just because they're shooting their ammunition means they're getting less effective each time they shoot. I mean, the guns are still just as effective as they were, 30 minutes ago, as long as they still have ammo. Well, that's the thing, is that these guns, each turn that these guns are shooting is representing, it's a unspecified time frame, but you can think of it as somewhere around 1 hour a turn, and maybe a little less, probably about 40 to 45 minutes a turn. So if these guns are shooting for 45 minutes straight, you're having guns taken out of action, guns that are having to be cooled down, all these sort of things that, that are going to have to be fixed. A wheel could fall, whatever. So, this recoil was very hard on those wooden carriages and on the men arming. I'm becoming kind of repetitive now, but that is what that drop of effectiveness really means. It's not necessarily they are, strictly running out of ammo. However, when that dot does get down to its final dot in their, on their last shot, that truly does reflect that they've used up all their ammunition. They've been shooting now for, 4 hours straight or whatever. They're out of ammunition. There are ways to refill ammunition, and those involve certain sub-commanders that you can purchase with your army, and that allows you to keep your guns firing longer. However, we do not have one of those CNCs, so this unit of artillery, once they fire off 2 more shots, they will be all out of ammunition. And that concludes the French shooting phase. We now go into the combat phase. Of course, there is no combat. So now we go into the reinforcement. And we roll 1d6 as always. The reinforcement factor is 4. It is now turn 8. So if we roll a 1 or 2, the French reinforcements will come on. And we rolled a 5, so there will be no French reinforcements again. And now we will go to turn number 9, which is the Russians. Okay, turn number 9 for the Russians. And now we're getting really close to the battle. I got that War and Peace song going on from the soundtrack when they're marching towards the enemy during the Battle of Austerlitz. So, or I think it was actually a rear guard action when that took place. But anyway, like I was saying before, the first phase of the turn is a discovery phase, which is any enemy units within sight, so within line of sight, and within 4 base widths of one of your units is going to be revealed. And as we measured last turn, we know that the French chasseurs are now within range of this infantry brigade, which is the Orenburg infantry brigade. And so we are going to remove their concealed marker. So now the Russians know for sure that there are French light cavalry right off there on their right side or on the French left. So they are now aware that that unit is there. And now I would stop having to pretend that I myself as a solo player didn't know what those are. Now the Russians are well aware of that, and I could react however I choose or however I think that this rookie Russian commander would react to those cav. So we are going to do a corps activation for all 6 infantry brigades. I think we got a pretty good field of view there. I'm not sure how this camera cuts off or crops out the picture. I know it's somewhere, somewhere along this edge. It doesn't give me exactly the things that I'm seeing on my camera, so still some experimentation left to do. Anyway, I find myself talking more and more as this video goes on. So we're going to activate all 6 brigades of infantry, and we are going to just pretty much move them all straight forward. Starting with the one on the Russian left. He's going to move right up there. That's 6 inches. And now we will move the rest right there. Right there. And right there. However, this brigade on the right, let me move him up first. This brigade on the right is going to pivot slightly on its front center point to be facing the French chasseurs, and now they will advance their 6 inches. Excuse me. So now we are looking at the battle map. It's definitely within some shooting range, I believe. So we'll have to double check those distances here on the brigades that are closest to one another. So skirmishing range is going to be 6 inches. Volley range is going to be within 3 inches. And let's see, 6 inches, 6 inches. And yes, no. So these two are within skirmishing range, and this unit is directly in front of that, and this one is directly facing that unit. So we will go ahead and move on to the next phase, which is our shooting phase, and we can talk about that finally. Now I bet you I got you guys really excited there because we were getting ready to start firing. I almost made a serious blunder. I got so excited to start shooting. All these Russians had just moved, and a unit cannot shoot in the same turn it has moved. So this is going to be an advantage for the French player because their units, or most of them, are going to get to remain stationary. But that's okay. We're still going to see some shooting this turn. So that's going to be great. Now, these Russian brigades are out of skirmishing range slightly. And they also want to get into a better position to receive the Russian assault, specifically on the Russian left. So they want to be in a better position, have a better firing solution in order to react and defend this position better. So the French are going to now do a corps activation with these 2 French brigades down here right in the center. And they are going to maneuver them. So we're going to activate them and remove those concealment markers. And the first unit is going to move. He's not going to move very far. He's just going to move a little bit, right about there. And I guess we should pivot him first, move there, and then move there. Now, the footprint is still covering, but that's okay because now this unit is going to also pivot on its front and move slightly forward. Now they're not flush. You know what? We'll just say he moved right there. That way they're flush with each other. And now they have adjusted the French right to be in a better position for the upcoming battle that's getting ready to take place. That is now officially getting ready to kick off. We can go back here, and we know, because we already measured the ranges here, that these brigades... Well, what the heck happened? Oh, okay. That's why. I was looking at the centimeter side. So, yes, barely within range. Barely touching, but yet still within range. And this one's within range of either. So, French are going to get to do some shooting here. And so the French movement phase is not done. So, we'll get to shooting in just a moment. But we are going to... first, we know we use 2 momentum, and the French want to do a single unit activation for the French chasseurs. So we need to roll a 3 or higher to continue with movement activations. And we rolled a 1, so the French are out of momentum and cannot activate their cavalry and will, I guess, have to deal with it. So we'll go ahead and we'll move over here to the shooting where the fun is getting ready to begin. Now, with the shooting, 2 base widths, or 6 inches in my games, is considered skirmishing fire. Within 1 base width, or 3 inches, is considered volley fire. So, excuse me, the difference is skirmishing is considered a penalty. Now, there are other penalties like firing at artillery or firing at cavalry or firing at a target at the crest of a hill, or if you're a unit with the impetuous trait like late war French infantry, Marie-Louise infantry or whatever. I can't remember if they have the impetuous trait. We are not playing late war with these units. We're pretending this is early/mid-war. But regardless, so there are many different types of penalties. Now, as you can see from here, the French line infantry have an elan of 6, which means they fire with 6 dice. But when they fire, it's not going to automatically go down like artillery, okay? The only thing that decreases it is taking hits. So if they get hit, it would go from a 6 to a 5, and so on and so forth. That is not only their morale / health / cohesion, but it's also the amount of dice that they're attacking with when they do shoot or fight in close combat. So they're going to roll 6 die. However, they have a penalty, which is skirmishing. All penalties reduce the dice rolled by half. So instead of 6, they'll fire with 3. But it doesn't matter how many additional penalties you receive, you only half your dice 1 time. So even if he was skirmishing and firing at cavalry, you only half your dice 1 time. So this infantry brigade right here is going to shoot at this brigade right here, and they need a 6 to hit. However, they do also have a bonus. As most of you probably are aware, French were very capable and adept at skirmishing. And that's what this symbol is right here, right next to my left thumb, that little silhouette. That means they have the skirmishing trait. And what that means is one of the 5s, if I roll a 5, or more than 1 5, only one 5 can count as a 6. So if I roll a 5, I can take one of those and count as a 6. So 6's hit plus 1 5. And I did roll a 5. I rolled a 4 and a 2 and a 5. So this 5, because I have the skirmishing trait, will count as a 6. Now, if I would have rolled 2 5s, it's only 1 5. It's the first 5 you roll to attack with. So I could only take one of those 5s and turn it into a 6. So it would still only be 1 hit. Now, the French just caused basically 1 casualty to the Russian infantry. And the Russian infantry have the same amount of elan. They have 6. And they also have this stout or steady trait right here. That's what that shield is. They're very good at defending. However, they're not defending this scenario. So So that would be, if you had this in a sleeve, you can mark it off with a dry erase marker and just cross out the 6, and now we know that that is a 5 elan. But for now, since we know he just took one hit and his elan is now 5, we'll just place a d6 behind him, a green d6, with the number 5, showing that he now has 5 elan. And he has now taken one hit. And now we can go back to the next French brigade, which is this one, and he was in range within this unit, so he's going to fire as well. And we also know that he has the penalty of skirmishing, so his dice are half down to 3 dice. And he also has a skirmishing trait, so he can count 1 5 as a hit. And he rolled 2 3s and a 1, so there are going to be no hits. And my dice this game are absolutely horrible. I think I mentioned this once before already, but it's been horrendous with my dice rolling and shooting phase. It's been absolutely nasty. So that is going to conclude those firing. We're going to remove the concealment markers because they're no longer concealed. And now we can shoot with this artillery. And this artillery is now going to shoot between this line, and we need to make sure that this gap is at least a half a base width, which is 1.5 inches, or the fire is obstructed and they receive a penalty. And it is about a little under 2.5 inches, so it is not obstructed. They still have a clear line of fire. They do have a 3 count on their ammunition, so they will only get to roll 3d6. And as we know, only 6s hit. And the artillery finally did something. They rolled a 6 on that Russian brigade. So we'll mark him down to 5 elan. So that Russian brigade, we've done damage to 2 Russian brigades so far, on either side of that center column, basically. And at least it wasn't completely ineffective. These French brigades, even if they are in range, which they are, cannot shoot because, remember, they moved this turn. So that will take care of the shooting phase, with the exception we need to mark this down to 2, and it will have 2 shots left at the 2 rating. It'll have the first shot at 2, and then its last and final ammunition at 2 as well, and then it's out of ammunition. So the shooting phase is done. We now go into close combat. There is no close combat because the French failed to get any more momentum to have their chasseurs charge. So now we go into the status phase. We don't need to deal with morale issues at this point because the battle is just now starting to get warmed up. And we do need to check for reinforcements though. This being turn 10, the reinforcement factor is 4. If we rolled a 3, that would be a 12. So that would be too high. So we still need to roll a 1 or 2 for these French reinforcements to come. And we rolled a 3, which is no good for the French reinforcements. So they are still waiting at the end of turn 10 for their pals to come along. And now we are going to go to turn 11, which is the Russians.